afternoon or evening is with you. Thank you so much for joining the London Policing College, the 7th and last of our workshops this year, leading up to our annual conference on the 23rd of November at the University of West London. Did that come through, May-Britt?
I lost the sound, so
yeah, for some reason I'll start again. Just welcome everybody to the 7th of the London Policing College conferences, and our third with an international perspective. And this afternoon, speakers, I'm delighted to say, from Japan, the United States, the United Nations working in Somaliland, and Canada as well. So a great mix of speakers, and my huge thanks to May-Britt Rombrero from the police in Sweden, who not only is acting this evening as our presenter and bringing the speakers together, but has done an awful lot of work on our behalf with the International Police Association in bringing colleagues from around the world. So we heard on Monday from colleagues from the Balkans. Yesterday afternoon we had speakers from Northwest Europe, and now, as I say, we have a more international flavour. The sessions are being recorded, and our speakers have very graciously agreed that if you want to go back into their sessions and look at them, they will do so. But without any further ado, I'll now hand over to May-Britt to introduce how the workshop is going to carry on and for our speakers to begin. So huge thanks to everybody this afternoon for speaking for us, and I hope you all get something out of the workshop. May-Britt, over to you.
Thank you very much, Bob. Well, I'm very pleased to say hello to every one of you. May-Britt Rinaldo Ronnebro from Sweden. I'm also the Secretary General of the International Police Association and a board member at the education center Gimborn in Germany. That is an international education center for police officers, but also those that are interested in police topics. Today, this is the third workshop, as Bob mentioned, this week, and we are now moving outside Europe and try to look at how the pandemic affected policing in several different countries, and we will start with Japan. And I would like to say welcome to Mitsuhiro Ohara, who is a serving police officer at the National Police Agency in Japan since 1990. He had several different kind of positions within the police, and he's got a very good reputation about his knowledge. And what he also done is that he shared his knowledge with the Indonesian police as an advisor. He been lecturing at George Washington University in USA, and he also been a visiting lecturer at Australian National University. And we are happy to say welcome to Mr. Hara, as he's also an IPA member. So I give the floor to you. Thank you.
Thank you, May-Britt. Nice to meet you, everyone. I'm Mitsuo Ohara, Director General for International Affairs at National Police Agency, Japan. As May-Britt introduced me just now, I have some background, international background, including Indonesia. I'm not sure if such experience or background might have the advantage in today's presentation, but I'm determined to do my best on behalf of national, on behalf of Japan Police. I'd like to move on to the today's subject, COVID-19 impacts. COVID-19 impacts and challenges to policing. Japan Police's experience on the backdrop of Tokyo 2020. Corona pandemic have affected police activities in many aspects, from frontline operation to administration, including HR management, training, education. A substantial part of those seems commonly experienced by worldwide police forces. As you know, Tokyo 2020, i.e., Olympics and Paralympics, was supposed to take place in 2020 just when the pandemic broke out and forced it to postpone a year, which led our Japanese police to have to carry an extra burden, namely another year engagement in major event security arrangement and concurrent management to deter the impact of COVID-19 as well. I'm pleased to have an occasion to share our experience today. Oh, 映ってない。あ、そっかそっか。Let me outline today's presentation. I'll put Olympic and Paralympic issue over others that many audience found most interested in. And then I'll focus on how to manage and deter the impact of COVID-19 in the routine workflow, besides Olympic unique issue. Before concluding, I'll touch on crime trend and challenge. This shows the event summary of Olympic and Paralympic Games. Olympic started from 23rd July and ended 8th August. 42 competition venues were located in 9 prefectures, and 19 VIPs came from 16 countries or organizations, including IOC President Thomas Bach, French President Emmanuel Macron, and US First Lady Jill Biden. About Paralympics is just as described. The Japanese government, the organizing committee Tokyo 20, the Tokyo Metropolitan Government, the IOC, and the IPC agreed to host Olympic and Paralympic Games without overseas spectator in March 2021 due to the prevailing worldwide COVID-19 pandemic. In June 2021, the 5 parties agreed to set a limit of 50% of venue capacity up to a maximum of 10,000 people at all venues. But ended up many competitions were held even without domestic spectators, otherwise several venues. And the Tokyo Metropolitan Government canceled all live public viewing events during the games in the capital. Also, the organizing committee Tokyo 2020 banned the sale and consumption of alcohol at venues. As you see, the number of infections around the time of the opening of Olympic happened to be on an upward trajectory, and the event was held amid the declaration of emergency. So we police force in charge of the security arrangement inevitably heightened wariness in COVID-19 management. I'll pick up this issue, torch relay, on the request of the workshop administrator. but would like to remind you that this is just one of many issues Japan police had to manage throughout Olympic Games. This slide describes the result of torch relay just roughly, and its implementation reality in each prefecture was diverse, depending on the COVID situation. For example, some prefectures altered the pre-planned route of relay, while the Tokyo metropolitan area and other prefectures canceled the relay on public roads and replaced with torch lighting ceremony at public space such as parks. The overall goal we set out first was risk control and damage control, which means deterring the occurrence of infection among police persons engaging the event, as well as reducing or mitigating the damage in case of the occurrence. To this end, we took multi-stage approach, which consists of 4 stages, where each stage defined respective protocols. Obviously, the ruling principle in overall stages was ensuring COVID-19 free condition of human body and equipment. This table shows protocols set for each stage. The first stage is training stage, which began more than 14 days before the relay started. At this stage, police persons engaging torch relay were to check and record body temperature and condition every day. The health condition checks were recorded till the end of all stages. The second stage is preceding stage, which began from 14 days and ended 1 day before the relay. A part of police persons, such as escort runners, were to be excluded from the task with a high risk for infection. For example, task contacting with many people. The third stage is implementing stage. During this stage, seats in all cars were assigned to each police person, and only designated officers were allowed to enter cars. They sanitized cars and equipment frequently and avoided to share equipment. Uniforms were washed every day. The fourth stage is post-implementing stage, which continued until 7 days after the relay. I will focus on this stage on next slide. Even after the end of torch relay, we set the protocol to prevent COVID-19 infection as a sort of damage control. At post-implementing stage, police persons engaged torch relay went on to check and record body temperature and condition like before the event. They also kept refraining from dining with people other than family or going out for unnecessary non-urgent reasons, because the occurrence of COVID infection among police persons was deemed jeopardizing the implementation of torch relay still going in other prefectures. I'll move on to COVID-19 deterrence in routine workflow. Countermeasures of COVID-19 in police facilities include installing physical barriers such as acrylic partitions to block virus transmission. Vehicles, including patrolling cars, are to be sanitized and ventilated frequently. On frontline case processing, police persons are to put on plastic gloves and wear face masks. At police academies, students were to check the temperature and refrain from going out for unnecessary non-urgent reasons. Or dining out 2 weeks before entering the academies and during staying at academies as well. Students also take seats at a sufficient distance each other in classrooms and avoid seating face to face in dining rooms. In detention facilities, common space is sanitized each time used. When entering facilities and going out as well, police persons are to sanitize their hands each time. If it was an ordinary time, several detainees share one room, but to prevent COVID-19 infection, one room, one detainee principle is applied. Following the basic action policy of the whole government against COVID-19, the National Police Agency encourages its employees to work from home so that they can mitigate and prevent the spread of COVID-19. The National Police Agency has increased the number of electronic devices, such as laptops, for work from home and installed video conference system. Also, working style has changed. Remote meetings have become more common for the meetings, especially between the national police agencies and prefectural police headquarters. This slide describes the trend of penal code offense, which was known to police in Japan. I know that some countries which adopted lockdown or stay-at-home policy during pandemic saw the drop in the number of crimes, such as violence, at an early stage. That represents the situation where less people in public, less crimes. Looking at the crime trend in Japan, the number of penal code offense decreased in recent years and dropped rapidly in 2020, especially the number of the street crimes, which accounts for the major part in 2020, decreased by 27% from 2019. In Japan, the state of emergency, i.e., stay-at-home policies, requested people to hold back from going out for unnecessary, non-urgent reasons. Trend of street crimes can be attributed to several factors, but the state of emergency might have impacts on its reduction. We concerned if the number of domestic and child abuse increased because of the stress and anxiety for COVID-19, but in fact, those numbers did not quite change after all when it comes to year 2020 situation. However, according to the survey by the Cabinet Office, the number of consultations regarding domestic abuse to the support center in 2020 fiscal year increased by 60% from 2019. So we need to look into the trend down the road more carefully. Besides, COVID-19 related crimes occur, such as burglary to shops, which halted following the government's request, and COVID-19 scam and phony websites for face masks or subsidies. I'll pick up several visibilities stemming from the pandemic. We saw many cases of COVID-19 benefit fraud as shown in this slide. I guess many countries adopted similar type of benefit since the pandemic and faced similar issue. We can find the situation that criminals unscrupulously exploited online application system aiming to guarantee swift payment and disguised eligible recipients. Another visibility of COVID-19 influence is resale of face masks and other items at higher price. The government enacted the ban on resale of face masks and disinfectant since the pandemic, and several cases were referred to prosecutors. These are other COVID-19 related cases. The case described above is selling COVID-19 antigen tests, which were not approved by the Japanese government. Suspects unlawfully advertised the false indication, capitalizing the public anxiety amid pandemic. The case described below is selling dietary supplements as medicines. Suspects also unlawfully advertised as if they had the efficacy of medicines, such as they can hold up against COVID-19 or they suppress the growth of the virus. I do not attempt to brag, but humbly say that Japan Police's experience through Tokyo 2020, while concurrently tackling COVID-19 pandemic, was extraordinary in a sense that it was an unprecedented mission, dragged down by many restrictions. I'd be pleased if you audience take away any lessons that would lead to next achievement of your police force in the future. In the meantime, we worldwide police forces should brace ourselves against the crime trend after restrictions are lifted and the life is going back to normal routines. We also need to gauge the long-term effect of the pandemic because some part of our life has reached to the point that would not go back to before pandemic. We Japan Police are ready to tackle our common issues collectively in maintaining public security and deterring the threat posed by criminals. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. O'Hara. Very interesting to listen to how the situation was 2020 and 2021 as it is of today in Japan, and also what you had to struggle with due to the postponing of the Olympics into this year, but also to keep your staff well trained another year. Do you have any figures about how many police officers was involved into the Olympics and the Paralympics?
I have no specific figure right now. I will later report it. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Well, I could also recognize the development of crime by the drop of crime or specific crime that dropped like domestic burglaries. But you mentioned here about the shops and also what we call the financial burglaries into properties that is like shops or factories and this. And I would think that it depends on the lockdown and restrictions to keep people at home, and they are not supervised in the same way as usual. And this has also been seen in other countries with lockdown. Sadly, we also seen in many of the countries worldwide, just as you did in Japan, an increase when it comes to domestic violence. And well, people coming together is not an excuse to be unkind, but it's a struggle when you are locked in and you can't do your normal daily work as usual. I believe that some people are not as patient as most of us are. I'm very pleased that you could share this with us, and I would like to say thank you very much. Very glad to have Japan on board, and we do hope to meet you in the future. Thank you very much. I would like to inform the participants of the workshop that if there is any questions that you would like to forward to any of the speakers today, feel free to write them into the chat forum, and we will bring them back in the end of this workshop if there would be any. So the speakers will stay through the workshop and they will be ready to answer your questions. So I would like to ask Mr. Joe Johnson to log in, as this is our next speaker. And Mr. Hara, thank you very much. If we ask you to mute and to put away your camera, so we give Joe Johnson the floor instead. Well, Joe Johnson is police officer from De Pere in the Wisconsin police in USA. It's we have met over there, so I normally say Green Bay. That would be easier for most of people to know. They are known within in sports at least. He got a degree in criminal justice, and his big interest, I would say, is defensive tactical training. He is one returning trainer for IBZ Gimbon and also a returning participant in different kind of seminar in Gimbon, the training center I mentioned earlier. And additional, he's also the national president of IPA USA. Today, Joe Johnson will share with us the police tactical training in the USA and how it had to be changed during the pandemic. So, Mr. Hara, if you close your camera. Thank you very much. I would like to give the word to Mr. Johnson. The floor is yours.
All right, thank you, May-Britt. I appreciate the opportunity to present to the group today. I'll get my presentation up here going. In the United States, obviously, we're a very large country with roughly 17,985 police agencies around the country. We had a big task ahead of us when the pandemic hit the United States in spring of 2020. Is my presentation up on the screen okay, May-Britt?
Yes, I got the overview as it is now.
Okay. So in spring of 2020, we obviously saw things change drastically around the world with the introduction of the COVID-19 virus. The United States, being a very large country, struggled in some areas dealing with law enforcement training because we had so many different government entities overseeing the different protocols and procedures they wanted to put in place to keep all of our citizens safe. The introduction of online learning to our law enforcement agencies, police academies, and police colleges was quickly put into place and replaced hands-on training in as many capacities as they were able to minimize contamination and exposure. The way that our subjects had to now be taught with the change in our procedure and the many safety protocols that were put into place to keep not only the instructors safe, but the students safe, differed from facility to facility, state by state across the country. We dealt with a few conflicts between our federal protocols, our state and local rules and recommendations, which caused some confusion early on. Along with the pandemic itself, we had some other things nationally that we were dealing with as the pandemic progressed. And as we got into the summer months, we saw mass rioting across the country. We saw the start of campaigning in a more aggressive approach for our presidential election. And at the same time, we saw a huge push for police reform, dealing with use of force training after the unfortunate incident involving George Floyd in Minneapolis, Minnesota. The program that I'll present to you guys today focuses on some of the changes that we looked at, from on-site training to online training, and how the sites manage the hands-on approach and subject matter that we are mandated by our states and our federal government to provide our officers and our recruits. With so many police agencies throughout the country, It is, difficult to give a complete overview of how things were done, but we'll focus on a few larger agencies, as well as how the recruit training was handled. Our recruit training, specifically in my area, requires 720 hours of initial police recruit training. These recruits are mostly hired on already by a police force. Some are self-sponsored though. As a result of the unique complexities that make up our police academies and employment rules, they had to look at each case individually. The one thing that was pretty consistent across the United States was that any classroom sessions that were simply lecture-based immediately took an online format, and the online lectures were provided to the students from their homes and gave them an opportunity to continue the learning without putting everything on hold. That was probably the easiest component of this transition, although many police academies, whether they are publicly owned through a college system or through an actual police agency, many did not have the resources set up to start online learning. So the research was done very quickly, and they relied a lot on educational institutions in their areas to come up with the best approach and the best software to utilize to provide the best product to the students. In our state, in Wisconsin, we have evaluators that will come in from the state of Wisconsin and make sure that the criteria and the curriculum is being followed per the state mandates, with the online platform that still allowed them to observe the courses being taught and make sure that the curriculum was being followed to their standards, and also that students were participating. As many of you can guess, with online learning, the students took this as an opportunity to try to find ways to skip out on sessions if they had work or more important things in their world to handle. So we had to put rules in place requiring cameras to be activated, that audio was able to be turned on and off on command or request. And it took some adjustments for both the students and the instructors to accommodate this new teaching style. The hands-on training sessions were a little more difficult. When hands-on training sessions were allowed, which were very few to begin in the COVID situation, they required a lot of administrative processes, which ate up a lot of good training time that the students missed out on. We were required to do daily health evaluations. The students were given a questionnaire prior to coming to school electronically, and if based on their answers, they were directed to either attend courses that day or stay home, and makeup sessions would be created for them. Temperatures had to be taken upon entry of the building and throughout the course of the day. Masks were mandated, as all of us know, and in some of our home countries, they still are in certain areas, and social distancing was also a factor, which makes topics such as defensive tactics very difficult when social distancing protocols are in place. What we saw with the students was a little bit of hesitation when having to go hands-on with other students, not knowing if they were truthful with their surveys. So we ultimately assigned them a permanent training partner. That had some positives from the health standpoint, in that they knew exactly who they were working with, which allowed them to be a little more open with their training. But it also limited the size and stature of people we could assign them to work with, which is something that we feel very strongly about, especially in a subject like defensive tactics. The students were encouraged to wear gloves if they chose. Some students would wear multiple pairs of rubber gloves. Some would wear more of a search glove to keep their hands free from any body fluids or anything that they may come into contact with out of fear of contraction of the coronavirus. If we came into positive cases in the academy setting, the student themselves would immediately be pulled from the class, as would the instructors that they had immediate contact with, until adequate testing could be scheduled and the results returned in a negative result. That type of process continued until September, when we started to see some of the requests or the protocols laxed in our area, but still to this day, the masks are required. We take extensive time to clean up training equipment, whether it be mats, pads, protective gear, any training simunitions type weapons that we would utilize. We take a lot of time to make sure all that stuff is properly cleaned and sanitized before it's used again. Some of the other things that we saw with COVID, which were a huge hindrance for not only the academies and training centers, but for police agencies across the country, was that some of the training programs were actually put on hold. They were placed on hold until a program could be developed to allow them to safely continue their training in a format that the academy that they were attending felt comfortable with. What that meant was agencies were left with a recruit in a academy setting that they couldn't utilize on the street, when across the country right now we're facing a shortage of law enforcement officers. This is because of a lot of the things that I had mentioned at the beginning with the defund the police portions or groups that are going around our country, with some of the racial tensions that we've seen over the last year and a half. The change to procedures, a lot of the recruits didn't feel that they could adequately represent the community or the police department. Therefore, they decided not to continue with either their academy training or their college training to become certified law enforcement officers. The oversight I had mentioned earlier, we had oversight at all levels of our government. The local governments, for example, in my state, we have 72 counties. Each of those counties had a different type of protocol put into place when it came to social distancing, holding of events, and the training academies across the country looked at their local guidelines and then looked at the state requirements and recommendations, which typically mirrored those of our federal government recommendations for safety. And as a result, there was a lot of confusion as to what could be done with training and what could not be done with training. Police in-service and tactical training at an agency standpoint, for the most part, came to a screeching halt at the beginning of the COVID-19 situation. Prior to meeting with you guys today, I took the opportunity to speak with several different agencies around the United States. The Wisconsin State Patrol, which is our state traffic police, Miami-Dade Police Department down in Florida, the Albuquerque Police Department, St. Louis Police Department in Missouri, and the Chicago Police Department just south of my location in Illinois. Each of these agencies reported that they put all non-essential staff on different assignments, and that they either were reassigned or asked to work from home to minimize exposure and positive cases of COVID. Looking at the Wisconsin State Patrol, what they decided to do was cancel all in-services for the rest of the calendar year of 2020 and reassess how they were going to approach training based off the mandates. All non-essential employees of that agency's police academy, they're one of 3 agencies in the state of Wisconsin that have their own police training academy. Were asked to work from home, where they would assess the safety protocols and come up with a game plan for the future. They did have a police academy in session at that time, which they did conclude, and then they held off on hosting any other police academies until spring of 2021. All of the agencies that I spoke with stated that tactical training, such as our mandated defensive tactics and firearms training, were all placed on hold, which was a huge concern for a lot of officers, because most agencies will give you 3 or 4 firearms trainings a year, one of which is a qualification, and maybe 1 or 2 defensive tactics sessions a calendar year. And that is pretty much the standard across the country, although some states do offer less training and some offer significantly more. But the trend nationwide is very similar to that example I provided. This concerned the officers because they didn't feel at the beginning they were getting much training as it was, and now COVID had completely taken their training opportunities away from them. My law enforcement agency requires 4 firearms trainings a year plus our qualification, and we ended up having 1 firearms training and our qualification. And the training that we did have, masks were required even though we were outdoors, and social distancing was factored into it, which caused some problems logistically when trying to plan the training, because we had to have adequate facilities or an increased number of training sessions to meet our local city government's requests for safety protocols. Most agencies took this as an opportunity to really push online training with their officers. Most states in the United States require a minimum number of hours of in-service training each year. My state requires 24 hours, and at my agency, about 78% of the officers that are employed by our department completed 100% of their mandated training online, watching pre-recorded webinars, watching training videos, doing analysis of different incidents that were offered online through a variety of companies. And in the United States, we saw a lot of companies such as Police One, Caliber Press, and similar law enforcement training companies completely flipped their training options, which in the past were mostly in person, into an online training platform. So to keep them alive financially, they offered online trainings, which a lot of officers took advantage of. Slowly over time, we've seen our in-service training opportunities return to, I guess, what we would deem the new normal, with some minor modifications made to them. But across the country, we're starting to see our training return back to close to what it was prior to COVID. The Chicago Police Department, they were a little more open with specifics as to how they handled their tactical and in-service training. And what Chicago Police Department did was, even though they were one of the agencies most in the general media, whether it be television or print or online, because of the things going on within their city. And unfortunately, Chicago over the last 10 years has ranked every year in the top 5 for the most violent or most dangerous cities in the United States. They were facing a lot of pressure due to officer-involved shootings and racial tensions. There were mass protests directed at defunding the police. Big pushes were made in Chicago and still are being pushed to this date, dealing with changes to policy and procedure, dealing with things such as foot pursuit policies, use of tear gas in riot type situations, and many other subjects. So their agency was in the spotlight a lot as it was, and they had to move around a lot of their resources to meet the needs of the department during this time of unrest. What the Chicago Police Academy did was shut down their entire academy, with the exception of essential personnel that they would need to keep the building itself and the division up and running. They took the recruits that were attending the academy at that point in time, paused their training, and reassigned them to districts throughout the city of Chicago to help disinfect squad cars, office areas, and equipment as needed. Their in-service, like I had stated previously, came to a complete halt and went 100% online, which the officers I spoke to reported it was very difficult to get online training on duty time because of the high call volume that agency has. Training in Chicago, such as firearms and defensive tactics training, which are state mandated and by policy require a certain number of hours of each subject, were postponed indefinitely to begin with, but started back up in the spring of 2021 with some minor modifications to them. Social distancing, when we look at tactical training, is a concern in some areas because we have to be, in most cases, up close and personal with defensive tactics training. And as a result of that, we are still requiring in a lot of areas officers to wear the masks, which forces the officer to reassess how hard and how much they push themselves in training, because we've had situations where officers would hyperventilate or black out as a result of wearing the mask or the type of mask that they were wearing. And just because of the overall hands-on nature of the training. So agencies really had to, in early 2021, take a look at how they were going to approach this stuff and realize that they have to get back into a process of offering hands-on training. So that has been a priority across the country to get that defensive tactics, tactical response. As we saw in the last presentation, and Maybrit hinted to it, we saw a decrease in some crimes, we saw increase in others, but in the United States, we've seen increases in domestic violence situations, hostage situations, suicide by cops situations where people will barricade themselves, forcing the police to use deadly force or try to get them to use deadly force against them, as well as a huge spike in situations involving people with mental illness. So our tactical training is very important for our officers to keep their tactics at the highest level that they're able to, because the types of calls that we're responding to as things begin to enter the new stage of normalization are becoming more and more dangerous for our officers. So we're about a year and a half into the pandemic, or on our way out of it. We've looked at some of the things that we've done here in the United States. We hopefully will be back to a normal that everybody's comfortable with, as vaccines are being administered more and more. We're now seeing boosters being offered throughout the country. And hopefully this presentation gave you guys a little bit of insight into some of the struggles we had as a country dealing with COVID-19 and the changes we had to make to our training, both hands-on and lecture-based throughout the country. So thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Joe. Very interesting to listen to all this information from a rather large country, USA, with all the states, different legislations and different police forces. I'm very thankful to you that you also took contact with other police forces and states around to give us a glance of what you have done in USA, because what I can see in the media in my country and also for the rest of what I can read in languages in Europe is that it's not much reported about the daily life of police officers facing the pandemic in USA. We can read about the problems you got with the demonstrations, and we can read about the high figures of people dying in the COVID. But basically, the rest that need to be the normal day for police officers is not written into newspapers. So I'm very pleased that you could give us this insight information. I do understand the difficulties you have had, because I think you share this with several other countries when it comes to training, and particularly the hands-on training, the defensive technical training is really a challenge when you come to an unseen virus and a deadly such, and you need to take all the precautions that you can find. And when you said that some use several gloves, I can understand, because there is no choice. It could be whoever that catch the virus. So interesting to see that also young people really looked into how to protect themselves during the training. You mentioned that some of them left the police college and went for something else. Do you think they will return? Is that what you're working for, or are they just lost as future police officers?
That's a tough question to answer. I think a lot of them look at what the media present as the picture for police. And I know one of my former students I've talked to directly, he had about 8 years of law enforcement experience, and he just watched the television news every day and saw what was being posted on the internet. And he said, as a person, he struggled to go to work every day and do a job that he felt he wasn't supported by the overall community. So he left, became an electrician, but now has since taken a part-time position as a police officer. So I think as the media attention becomes less and less, we'll see some of these students come back to the job and continue a career in law enforcement.
It might be where their heart belong. You never know. I do hope that those that are qualified for becoming a police officer will return to it. So I say thanks so far. I would like to move over to the next speaker. There will be a few more questions for you when the two other speakers also done the presentations. So next on today is a colleague of mine from Sweden, but he is not in Sweden at the moment. He is in Somalia, and particularly in Somaliland. Joseph Wiklund. I'm very happy to see you in picture. I try to give a little background. I know that you are head of the local police area of Medelpad when you are back in Sweden working, but at this time you are in Somaliland as police advisor and for the UN mission. And we are looking forward to listen to you and your experience from the election training during the pandemic in this UN mission. So I give you the floor. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I just recently realized, I don't know what the time difference is through all the audience here. So I said good morning, good afternoon, and good evening maybe. So anyway, I called you from Somaliland, and the Somaliland. Actually, I didn't know about this place before the Swedish police force contacted me and asked if I was interested to move to this position in UN as a strategic police advisor. So I started to do some research about Somaliland and figure out that Somaliland is a self-proclaimed state in the northern Somalia. The federal member states of Somalia and not any other country almost in the world have recognized Somaliland. But it's fair to say that Somaliland actually has built up since 1991 their own constitution, their own police force, their own legal system, their own coast guard, and also a lot of infrastructure has been created here since the civil war in Somalia. So maybe that's not some new information for you audience, but at least that was very new for me about this country, Somaliland. Here in Somaliland, I work most closely with the police commissioner for this country and also the Minister of Interior, who are in charge for the police force here in Somaliland. And the main duties that I try to contribute with is strategic implementation of rule of law, how to emphasize community-oriented policing, democratic policing values, and of course in this kind of environment, that's more easier said than done. This is a state very religious, and of course, in this context, the infrastructure in terms of digital environment is not very well built up, even though they actually have a very good internet connection, as you can see now. So I will try to figure out how to put my presentation on here, because I would like to show you mostly a few pictures from the work and tell you something about how we tackled this election period that was taking place this spring 2021. Here in Somaliland, UN is one of the three major international organizations next to EU, which has a mission here called EUCAP, and also the British office is one of the government who supports Somaliland. But there are also numerous of NGOs who work closely together with us here in Somaliland, which I appreciate very much. One maybe of the reasons that why I was asked to go is because Sweden is one of the donors for a lot of the programs that is taking place here, and especially one that I will address is called the Joint Rule of Law Program, and that is actually UNDP, that's United Nations Development Program, who runs that program, funded by Sweden and EU. And during the spring, our main focus was to conduct election security training. Because during the spring, it was the parliamentary election, and Somaliland has at least a fair history of quite safe election, which is something that they encourage very much and is very proud of in terms of their neighboring countries who maybe not can see that kind of development last year. So they find very great pride in working with the parliamentary elections and the election security. And one of the things then, besides trainings, is that this program has supported Somaliland with infrastructure as cars, situation room, and also training to gain situation awareness of the different regions in Somaliland. In that case, it was a training for people who are using an application in their smartphone to interview citizens and officials throughout Somaliland to get the best situation awareness of the security situation before this election. But I also must share a little story about the situation room, because that was something that the British office was helping out with and implemented their way of working with I think it's gold, silver, and gold and silver room, and the gold room is their top situation room as far as I know. So when Somaliland was building this situation room, not only was it called the gold room, they also painted the entire room with a gold ceiling and gold furniture and gold. So I guess there could have been some quite funny misinterpretation of what gold room actually means, but I think that's a great story. So I will try to move over to some of my reflections of how we were supposed to do this training. The time was shortage, and that was because of some decision-making processes that were supposed to be taken care of by the Minister of Interior. So we were a bit late. The election were to take place late May, and we started to work with this training in mid-March, how to conduct this training. And we realized quite quickly, not that it was only the COVID situation, the training was also had to be taken place during Ramadan. And so I had two actually very big obstacles to try to achieve and come over to actually conduct this training. And this program that I mentioned, Joint Rule of Law Program, one of the things that they have supported is a training manual for election security. And that is a very rigorous manual, almost 170 pages long, actually also claiming that we could almost use 2 weeks of training to actually emphasize all the material. And the fundings that I had claimed that we could train 50 participants from all the regions in Somaliland. So we started thinking how to address this. And one of my key learnings from this is lower your expectations very, very much in this difficult times. Because sometimes it's better to do something than nothing. And I guess that throughout this national and worldwide police agencies in general, they want to perform well. They want to do their best possible. And many times also, at least in my opinion, our interest in how we would like to do our training would rather not be something that we do halfway. We want to do it full way, all the way. So the first thing I really need to do is to lower the expectations, both from myself, but also in terms of the debating I had to take with the police commissioner and the Minister of Interior so we could be on the same page. Can this actually be done? And we figure out that this is so important, so let's try. So my first learning is lower my and the expectations. So we lowered actually 2 weeks of training that was supposed to be conducted in 2 times 20 people, and I managed to shrink the training material so we can only do it in 5 days during Ramadan, and this was actually only half days because after lunch and prayer time there were no one who actually was able to conduct training. So that is my first learning. The other one is what in this training manual can I exclude? And this was a TOT training. That means these participants were supposed to then go out in the regions and conduct training themselves. So that was the main reason for this training. And then it's fair to say that decreasing the number of modules, and one of the components that we immediately erased was the how to actually do training themselves. Instead, we, after every module, gave them a few minutes for reflection, and in their notebook have some time by themselves to think of this question: how can I bring this last topic into my own environment, my own context where I work, with the culture differences throughout Somaliland? So that was just an example of how we lowered our standards of something that we actually could spend more than 1 day of discussing. How do you actually conduct training yourself? Instead, rather have small individual reflections after every module. The third part that was a learning is that in these times, in this context where we didn't have any possibility to do online training, we had to meet these people in person. And also that was a great experience to meet these people, because that emphasizes the possibility to debate. And as you can see in this picture, we also had quite a few numbers of women participating. And in this context, that's something that could also become a very large discussions about the differences between how you look upon men and women within the police force. So that would have been impossible to discuss in an online meeting. So the third learning anyway is that I realized that I can't do this by myself. And if I may speak freely, sometimes I think international organizations can be have some boundaries between them. And at least in my opinion, one of the key features to work in international relationship and partnership is to include other agencies, invite them to be a part of this kind of trainings. So I teamed up with both ERCAP and the British office, and we shared the burden of creating training material. We shared the burden of maybe some of the organizational skills. For example, this training academy is built by the British government a few years ago. So of course they had good influence that we can use these facilities in a good manner. Of course, I think my American colleague also mentioned some obvious learnings. Is to be patient about arranging the classroom. As you saw in the last picture, they were sitting far from each other, of course having all the necessary safety precautions of gloves and hand sanitizers and all that. But I rather also emphasize the fact that in this time it's actually even more important to know your context that you're in. What does it mean to have prayer time? How important is that? The cultural context of men and women, can they actually sit in the same room? Can they interact in discussion? Should we intervene when a debate going on? And that was something that also the international community stood up together, and we helped each other very much to learn from each other. What is basic class rules, time management, for example, something that a cultural context in this environment does. If we start 8, no one's there until 8:30. I don't like it, but it's something I have to take in account when planning training. On the other hand, I must say during this 8 months now, they know me that I'm a bit of a time fascist actually. So when I'm doing training and meetings now further, they many times actually come in time, which I am very appreciative of. Another example of knowing your surroundings and your culture is the importance of opening and closing ceremonies. Something that I thought, okay, we can save some time, but by canceling an opening ceremony, which obviously it was a major mistake and had to be repaired the day before the training started. So because in this context, that is something of great importance to have maybe the minister or the police commissioner opening this training. My final point would be the valuable of a proper risk assessment. Of course, we knew that I don't think we had the same demanding situation as my colleague in Japan of the highest ranking of COVID cases, but in Somaliland, of course, we also have to take in account that there's not a very legible way of measuring the actual COVID cases. So we sat down with health and doctors and nurses and did a proper risk assessment. Is it worth it to meet in person, even though actually we are recommended not to? And we come up with, when doing this risk assessment, knowing that we're up for an election, in an environment that have history of difficulties during elections, and the risk of people being hurt in polling stations and in their effort to make their voice heard in this democracy. And then we ended up in this risk assessment and saying, yes, we go for it, we do it. So that's one also of my learnings and conclusion, that in this environment, it's actually also important to take some risks. And you have to evaluate those risks in terms of what you can gain and what if the benefit from this training is greater than the risk, then we are good to go, and we were. This picture you see now is one of the other trainings we did, where we were training 40 of the special protecting police officers. I'm very happy to also give some credit, in this case, to the EUCAP mission, who actually was one of the first time that their close protection officers were allowed to do work, not only to give close protection to the EUCAP mission members, but also to give training to the Somaliland police. And it's worth to mention that the EUCAP close protection officers, they work day-to-day basis with the special protection unit in Somaliland. So this training became a very good opportunity for them to get to know each other, and the benefits were far, far beyond the risks. And as you can see in the picture, this was also taking place outside, which maybe will be my final input in how I address this situation, that in any times we try to do training outside. I would definitely also say and take the opportunity to then present how did the election day go. And as a police officer, I think many of us agree on that. At some of us, we join policing to do better good, and to maybe at some point, at least for me in Sweden, being a part of the democracy and the peacekeeping and the security for the citizens. And during this day, I felt very proud of all the work my team and the entire UNSOM office achieved during this election training, and also for the EUCAP mission and the British office, who really stood up and took some risks, even though their regulation was even more strict than UN in terms of having physical meetings. So when I received a phone call from the ministry during this election evening, they saying to me that the election has been pulled off in an extremely safe and secure way. There were only minor incidents reported, and one of the actually most disturbing cases was it was too warm, and the queues to the polling stations were too long. So there were some arguing about being in the line for too long in the sun. So when I received this phone call and later on also a text message from the minister saying that we did it, it was worth the effort, and it was worth the risk of actually meeting in person. And I did an evaluation trip to one of the Somaliland outskirts called Burao, a town 5 hours drive from Hargeisa. And I met the 3 participants in the TOT class and had individual interviews with them, asking them how did they perform the training after our training was done. And it was a very emotional actually to hear them telling the story of how they arranged facilities, how they used the training material, how they focused on human rights, how they focused on democratic policing, and the importance of the police being a part of the society, not the military in this case. And I'm quite confident that they were telling the truth, that they actually trained at least 500 police officers in their region 2 weeks prior to the election. And that will conclude this short session as something that I will bring with me for the rest of my life, as something that we all contributed to this election in Somaliland in difficult times. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Josef, and congratulations to be part of a successful, peaceful election in a country that is very, very new. And what I would say, young and religious, and to learn about how to tackle a pandemic at the same time is not always so easy, but you've done it together with your friends over there in Somaliland. I love this story about the golden room.
Yes, it's a great story.
So when I meet you back home in Sweden, I will remember you as the man with the golden room.
Yes, and I actually have a picture of that room, so I'm sorry I didn't bring it, but maybe I can share it with you later on. Thank you so much.
Yeah, trainer in such a time as it was, and also when you talked about this gender discussion, I can understand, because that is also what we face when we got our migrants coming into the country, and we try to mix different people in the same room. So it's not really new to police officers in Sweden, but when you come to the country where they all are in the same position, you need to find solutions. And I really like the idea about the democracy, and that you allow the discussions, because that also make these people grow and feel part of it. Tradition and culture is not always that easy. So I do hope that you hang on, and a big thank you for joining us from Africa. We will move to the next speaker, and the last for today, and also the last speaker for this workshop. And it's a friend of mine from Canada, that is Konstantinos Papasoglu, that is a former police officer, a police mayor from the Greek police, and but he moved into the academical world and done quite a lot of research, I would say, and also written many books. I've read a few of them, and sometimes by yourself and sometimes together with other people. I also know that you done research, and that you today would like to share with us about the bravery and heroism and leadership in the time of the pandemic. So I'm so pleased that you could join us today, Konstantinos, and a big greetings from Ulrike at Gimborn Castle, where you once came to as a lecturer. Unfortunately, she is ill today, so she couldn't join us, but she wanted me to tell that she's very pleased that you could come back in this combination with the London Police and College. So I've given the floor to you.
Wonderful. Hi, everybody from across the pond. Can you hear me well?
Yes, can hear you and see you well. Thank you.
Perfect. And I just need to figure out how to upload my PowerPoint slides, unless if Karen actually helps with that.
If you look in the top corner on your right-hand side is a small arrow. pointing
Okay.
upwards. If you click
Yeah,
on that one, your presentation
I
is
don't see that.
open.
Okay.
Okay. You got a telephone on your right hand side in the top of the where you put. Now I can only read it in Swedish. So if Bob would
I
like
don't see anything here. Yeah, I don't see anything.
It should be where you change your camera and microphone. It's next to that one.
Oh, okay. I think it's that one. All right.
Yeah.
So let me. Do you see that now?
Yes, I do.
Perfect.
Thank
you. My name is Konstantinos. Like May-Britt said, we had a wonderful time at Gilborn, I think about 3 years ago, during the IPA, one of the IPA great events. And I had a great opportunity to meet great colleagues from all over Europe, I think, and there were some also people from the US. I'm a police psychologist. I do clinical work with law enforcement primarily, as well as other first responders, paramedics, and fire department. And I also do research work. My research work focuses on police resilience, wellness, and mental health. As May-Britt actually noted, over the last 5-10 years, me and my colleagues have been quite prolific, and we came up with a large number of publications and presentations on this topic. I feel very fortunate enough and quite appreciative and grateful of the fact that I have all these kind of great collaborations with people, great scholars from all over US, Canada, Europe. And I had also the opportunity to collaborate with many law enforcement agencies. Currently, actually, we're with Arizona PD in Tucson, Arizona. Last year, actually, I was part of the Yale team, Yale University, the School of Medicine, and we had a great collaboration with the New Haven Police Department in Connecticut. And also currently I provide clinical services, and I do assessments with 2-3 agencies in Canada, in the Toronto area. It's interesting, this topic, especially the role of leadership and bravery, heroism during COVID-19. If you search the literature, you will find that currently we have thousands of articles published related to this topic, COVID-19. Different types of topics related to COVID-19. And right after the COVID-19 outbreak, my colleagues and I decided to actually introduce the topic of the challenges that the law enforcement officers experience during the COVID-19 outbreak and during the pandemic in general. So we came up with 2 articles that were actually published. One of that published in the Police Chief magazine, published by the International Association of Chiefs of Police. And the other one was published by the Journal of Community Safety and Wellbeing. Today's presentation is going to summarize those kind of articles. It's the whole kind of idea is that we actually get a collective approach. Collective meaning that it's not just the role of health professionals or the officers to help. It's a collective approach, and we realize that the role of leadership also is vital. Is vital in helping officers and the organization in general to cope with the unpredictability and the unknown impact of COVID-19 pandemic. And even in my clinical work, when I do actually a part of my clinical work entails wellness evaluation check-ins with frontline police officers. And one of the main topics that comes up is COVID-19, and not only dealing with COVID in the line of duty, but also dealing with the social life aspect of these kind of things. Many officers tell me, because I ask them, what is the biggest struggle in your life right now? And they say, the biggest struggle in my life is social life, because I have kids at home, and we have a stressful job, and we go back home, and we try to figure out ways on how to maintain a healthy social lifestyle, considering that we have kids at home, we have families at home, and we want to also make sure that we maintain a healthy balance between personal life and professional life. And that can be challenging as well. To start with, challenges and crises is not new in policing. It's part of nature of police work. As we all know, officers, frontline officers, uniform officers, they deal with large number of potentially traumatic incidents, a lot of crises, many critical incidents that can have a large kind of spectrum of different type of incidents. I recall in one of my sessions with one of the officers that I see as part of my practice, my clinical practice, when I asked him out of curiosity, I say, by the way, he was in service. He's been in service for more than 30 years. I think it's about 35 years now. And I asked him, I say, how many critical incidents have you responded to over the course of your career? And he said, Doc, honestly, I could say more than 900 to 1,000. And some of them were also fatal related. I mean, they included some form of death or loss. So that being said, trauma or crisis is not new in police work. It's part of the identity, it's part of the nature of police work. So considering that all those kind of events, potentially traumatic events, accumulate, we also need to consider the role of a pandemic outbreak and how this actually interacts with police work and how it changes the nature of police work and the role of leadership. And the role of an organization is quite vital. It can, as you may see in the literature, we're talking, when we refer to resilience or wellness, we not just mention or refer to the person's wellness or resilience, but we also talk about the organizational wellness and resilience, and how we all collectively, the role of the organization can help and promote this direction. And I recall many times talking to our police colleagues, they tell me many times that, the operational stressors are not as intense compared to the organizational stressors. And I can definitely see that. When you go back to your department and you have to deal with a police leader who doesn't seem to be very much responsive, lack of understanding, heavy workloads without breaks, not appreciation of the work that you do, all those kind of things can accumulate over time and can definitely have an impact on the officer's mental and physical health. I talk to many officers. I also work with dispatchers, and they tell me the workload that we have to deal with is so heavy that sometimes we barely have lunch break. So imagine now when you don't satisfy the basic needs of your people, when they actually have this kind of dealing with very short lunch breaks, or if they don't have anything at all, any break at all, that can increase the levels of stress and, of course, the risk towards burnout. Same with the other perspectives. When something happens in the department and needs to be addressed and is not addressed, or the leaders that don't show this kind of proper understanding and empathy, and that can actually make the officers feel that they live in isolation or lack of understanding in terms of coming from the leadership. Of course, I don't want to portray only the negative and unhealthy side of things. Of course, there are many leaders out there who do amazing work, and they're quite successful in approaching their personnel. And coming from personal experience, I can tell you that I have many of the police colleagues that I see as part of clinical work, and they told me, my supervisor encouraged me to come and see you. They encouraged me to come and see you as a way to open up and start sharing with you all the challenges I have and best ways that I can get help. So many times, actually, supervisors can either help towards the wellness promotion and resilience, or it can actually, by omission or commission, can make things quite complicated for the whole organization. And as I noted before, and stress and crisis is not new to policing. It's been embedded in police work and identity. And speaking of that, I had a recent conversation with another colleague who's been a police psychologist for many years now, almost I think for more than 35 years. And he's been practicing in California. And he was telling me, you know what, these kind of issues come quite often. And he recalled the HIV/AIDS crisis outbreak in the early 90s, late 70s, early 80s, and he said early 80s, and he said we had exactly the same thing back then because we had the HIV/AIDS crisis, and many officers actually they were scared, they didn't know how to deal with those kind of issues. There was all this kind of huge amount of information, and sometimes it's hard to actually judge and to realize what is valid and what is invalid in terms of the validity of information. And sometimes considering that is very hard to balance, as we noted before, personal life and professional life, and that can be quite challenging. Speaking of that, COVID-19 actually has afflicted lots of challenges to police work. I recall at the beginning, during the COVID-19 outbreak, I was working as part of the police department in Connecticut at Yale, and I recall many officers were quite concerned. First of all, because it was the unknown. At that time, we didn't know exactly what we were dealing with. Many officers had family members and friends who had susceptibility in terms of health, with different kind of physical health issues. And that comes a conflict here, a moral conflict, when on one side you're supposed to perform your duties and you have to do the job in the line of duty. And on the other hand, you know that back home, you have family members or friends who actually, their health is quite susceptible to any kind of infection. And knowing that if those people get COVID, their health or even their life is at jeopardy. So you have this kind of inner conflict that actually raises this kind of moral kind of conflict, distress, injury in your life as an officer. And it's interesting, if you see, if you check in the literature on the thousands of articles that I mentioned at the beginning of this presentation, you will realize that there is a lots of articles that came out from medical and nursing journals that actually refer to exact same thing, the moral conflicts that frontline professionals experience when they deal with COVID-19 patients or people who have been infected with COVID-19. So it's this kind of balance, and the other challenge is officers, as we know, they can't work remotely. Many professionals, they were flexible enough and they were able to switch and work from home, turning on your laptop and providing your services or doing your work from home. And many companies were okay with that because At the end of the day, they even save money. They didn't have to pay for rental space or anything. However, that's not the case in policing. In policing, the officers they had and they have to go to the line of duty, deal with many different civilians. As you know, deal with some civilians who actually they are influenced by conspiracy theories, and they were not very careful and cautious at all in terms of their own safety, and they jeopardize the officer's safety in terms of COVID. So all these kind of risks that officers had to deal with. And speaking of that, the role of course, the agency, the role of the organization, the department, and the role of leadership is integral on how to help officers to maintain a healthy balance between personal and professional life, as well as to alleviate these kind of concerns and potential risks they are dealing with. So speaking of that, the role of leadership is crucial. It's it is crucial because the building relationship of trust is important. Having this kind of open communication is important, and also showing this kind of compassion and empathy. And by compassion, meaning I'm not referring to the fact that, I don't expect police chiefs and executive managers and everything policing to get the role of therapy or the therapist or a social worker or anything, but to be able to do this kind of regular check-ins with your personnel, to apply this kind of active listening and communication skills. When I see, for instance, that one of my officers is kind of aloof or isolated, I would, instead of trying to be punitive, to be able to spend some time and talk to her or him, and say, I see that you're kind of aloof today, or you seem to be kind of distracted today. Is everything going okay at home? And especially at the beginning of the outbreak, there were lots of officers who were quite concerned about their own family members and even about their kids. I recall I talked to one of the district managers, and he was telling me, you know what? They asked us to keep doing the job, which is okay. I totally understand that. I get it. But on the other hand, I have kids at home, and I don't know what is going to happen if my kids get COVID and something goes wrong with my kids, especially considering that some officers, as I mentioned before, they may have kids with other health issues as well. So leaders need to be able to, of course, to read this kind of signs and be cognizant of their officers' emotional reactions and how they deal, in terms of performing their duties, how they interact with the public, and how they present themselves. That being said, one of the recommendations is to actually, for the leaders, is to educate, especially since the COVID-19 outbreak. There's been a number of legit and valid resources that they can rely on. And I'm saying that because at the beginning of the outbreak, especially, many police leaders or officers, they were not aware of this kind of situations and what they were dealing with and all the ramifications of the outbreak. So they needed more information to better educate themselves. So there is this kind of resources coming from the Center of Disease and Control, CDC, and they specifically have information about law enforcement and the role of law enforcement officers. Speaking of that, also leaders may also be aware of and educate themselves. And I would highly recommend police leaders to actually focus on collaborating with health professionals, caregiving professionals, so getting information about how people react when they get stressed, or what are the first signs of burnout are. What does it mean when I feel, my body feels very tight, or I have this kind of frequent migraine headaches or disturbed sleep? How would that affect the whole ethos and performance in the department, as well as performance of our officers in the line of duty? Other coping strategies that can also get in terms of, collaborating, especially with healthcare providers, how to be more empathic and supportive to my police officers, my personnel, providing guidance. If I see that an officer actually seems to be aloof, or the performance is low, or they seem to get frequent sick leave of absence, I would definitely take some time with them, and I recommend maybe they need some kind of break. Maybe they may need to talk to a professional, to a therapist, and address those kind of issues. That way, making my officers feeling that we embrace them with understanding and caring instead of trying to be punitive or isolating them. And communication is very integral, especially in periods of time where we experience crisis or similar kind of challenges like that. And I should say, in terms of communication, I had a recent conversation with one of my patients that I see in my clinical practice. He's a SWAT officer, so he was telling me we have our sergeant, and he prefers to talk to us individually instead of on a group basis level. And we also talked about how this actually can have an impact on the whole kind of culture in the unit, the whole culture of the platoon, and how that have a negative impact in terms of their communication, because they act all together as a group, as a team, as a family. And he was raising this kind of concerns of the lack of communication come from the leader, because he said, we talk to him one-on-one, but we lack this kind of group-basis communication in terms of briefing and debriefing. On the other hand, I talked to officers who also told me the other way, that the leaders actually instill this kind of group communication, and that definitely helps them to de-escalate any kind of emotional reactions they have, or any kind of irrational negative thoughts, unpleasant feelings that can actually process in the group during the briefing or debriefing process. And that can be quite influential and helpful, maintaining the groups or the department's wellness as well as resilience. Speaking of that, I also realized in different collaborations with police agencies that peer support groups are quite influential and important. Instill this kind of sense of interconnectedness and support within the culture of sisterhood, brotherhood, of police culture, and also recognize the achievements of the officers, praising the officers. And I know of the fact that some of agencies, they even have special kind of ceremonies or meetings where they praise and acknowledge the contributions of its members. And that I think quite influential in helping officers to get this kind of satisfaction about their work and helping people in the community. I think I will have to wrap up because our time is limited. So I'm closing this kind of presentation pretty much with one of the quotes in one of our articles, where we actually placed emphasis on the important role of leadership in the officers' health, wellness, dealing with crisis, and especially during the COVID-19 crisis that has been affected not just officers, but our society at large as a whole. And some of the resources that I would like to share with you, some of the resources, as I mentioned before, they come from the CDC and Disease Control and Prevention website. We also have law enforcement information on COVID-19 by the International Association of Chiefs of Police, and they have regular updates. They have they present in a way that is very succinct and very practical and understanding, customized to law enforcement officers and agencies. And some other references that you may want to refer to. I think Karen, also one of the organizers, has my presentation, so if you ask for it, she'd probably be happy to share this kind of work links with all of you. And I was going to say, now that I saw NYPD, the reference here is that it's not just dealing with the crisis and all these kind of conflicts that related to COVID, but also many officers, especially, I checked, I remember the statistics and numbers from NYPD, I think more than 40, 45 law enforcement officers, they lost their lives due to COVID. So that's another threat that all officers they have and they have to deal with, and something that can be considered by the leadership, especially considering the fact that it's a type of threat it's an invisible threat that can still jeopardize officers' lives and health, as well as their families' health and lives. Thank you so much. And I'm not sure if we have any comments or anything.
Thank you, Konstantinos.
Thank you
Police
so much. I'm
resilience, of
trying
course,
to.
that is
Yes.
very interesting for us all to listen to your knowledge, and we are so happy that you share all the links with us as well. When I look at your presentation, I still remember last time when we had you as a presenter that you talked about the leadership and the importance of the leaders, that they communicate and that they got good communication skills, because that is also a lifesaver for many officers that are under stress or have been facing really traumatic things, whatever it could be.
Mm-hmm.
When I look at the pictures in your presentation, I can understand. I had a question if this is only a research that is focused on to North American police like Canadian, USA, or is it also something that you can reflect with your knowledge back to like European police officers or elsewhere in the world?
I would definitely say that has a ripple effect to all police agencies in democratic countries, societies. Considering that from my international experience living over the last years in 3 different countries, I realized that there are lots of common denominators across policing in Europe, UK, Australia, New Zealand, US, Canada. We have lots of common denominators to share in terms of types of threats and challenges in policing, especially in regards to resilience and well-being.
I got another question that's asking, is it only police officers that are facing this kind of trauma, stress, and crisis, or would there be other professions you would like to mention to compare to that are, well, not equal, but similar to policing?
Absolutely. It's other type of first responders as well. We're talking about fire department, paramedics, even people who work in medical professions like nurses or medical doctors. They experience similar or to an extent different types of challenges, but there is definitely be challenges in regards to COVID and dealing with COVID as well. I had one of my patients in my practice, he's a paramedic, and he was telling me, especially during the COVID outbreak, we were transferring them with the ambulance and they were pretty much like declared dead. The physician, the doctor had to just come and check in the ambulance and they were just declared dead and we had to keep doing that all the time. And that can trigger a lot of moral concerns and conflicts because you try to do the job and saves lives, but on the other hand, you deal with death on a day-to-day basis.
Yes.
It's not just policing, it's paramedics, ambulance, nurses, physicians, especially in emergency departments, fire department. We're talking about a large number of caregiving frontline professionals who experience that.
Thank you very much, Konstantinos, and thank you for your presentation. I'm very happy that you could join us today. I got a few questions for the 3 other presenters as well. So if Joe Johnson would like to open his camera and unmute, I do hope that you will be with us still.
Yep,
Hi, Joe.
I'm still here. Hi.
Yeah, good. I got one question when I'm asking what would happen if a police officer's certification, when it comes to this, license for his pistol or rifle, whatever it could be, if that would expire and or the tactical training would expire, what would you do during the pandemic?
So what most of the states ended up doing during the pandemic was giving, in essence, a waiver for that year. And they would ultimately recertify them into the following calendar year in hopes that things would be normalizing, which we're starting to see. We were able to get qualifications in this year. But some of the areas like defensive tactics, our driving recertifications have been put on hold till at least the end of this year. So the licensing entities are aware of the situation and are giving us those concessions with waivers.
So, sounds good, and I do hope they had a good training before they had to stop, so they will be good back on track when they come back to the possibility. Yeah, and I had another question because you talked about the fund of the police, and I had a question if this is the same as they speak about in UK. It's less police officers and not as much budget as before. Is this similar to what is discussed in USA, and is it on the go that politicians actually consider to defund the police?
The concept is the same as what we heard in the news in the UK with reallocating funds from police into different areas of government like healthcare, some of the different welfare systems. It was just, from the United States perspective, in a lot of areas, it was a way to cause some type of hurt to the police forces by taking services and money away from them, and ultimately giving some of the groups that were out protesting less of an opportunity to encounter police because the resources would be stretched greatly. We saw places like Portland, Oregon, Seattle, Washington. I know New York City had talked about some of that as well, about defunding and reallocating funds. Close to home, Minneapolis was one of the bigger ones where they were going to privatize their police force and go more with an armed security force versus an actual police force. But as time progressed and they saw that these protests and the groups going from large city to large city causing massive damage and headaches for law enforcement, they slowly trickled off and weren't as vocal. They realized that they were making mistakes, and Minneapolis, for example, lost a huge number of police officers to retirement, or officers just saying, I can't work for this force and move to a neighboring agency or give up law enforcement as a whole. So we started to see a lot of government leaders starting to backpedal on that mentality and actually provide the funds needed to keep the police forces operational.
Yeah, I think that's the same as we see in some of the European countries as well, that politicians are, how to say, a little bit too quick to make a statement. So I do hope it will go back to the normal, because I think we are needed, and normally the public loves us, even though we don't always believe this. Talking about this, about liking police officers, I had a question about suicide by cop or forced suicide, and an example so the audience understand what this is, and how would a situation like this be?
Sure. So, some examples that we've seen in our area involve subjects barricading themselves with weapons. Obviously, in the United States, it's very easy to become an owner of a firearm for most citizens, but they will barricade themselves with large amounts of ammunition and firearms. We could have situations where officers are in a standoff with police and ultimately will point their firearm toward the direction of the police, knowing that depending on distance and cover and things like that, we're going to defend ourselves. To make it, I guess, a comparable situation for what we see a lot over in the UK, we're starting to see more people not go the firearms route, but the edged weapons. So knives, machetes, those type of weapons, because they are readily available, where people will charge at us or go after other community members. And similar to other countries as well, we're seeing an increase in some areas of use of vehicles as a weapon. So in a suicide by police or suicide by cop situation, we would see the community member or the person doing something toward us, ultimately forcing our hand to use deadly force against them. to end their life, so that the focus would be on the police doing that, not themselves taking their own lives. And because it is such a problem, we've adjusted some of our training from the tactical team side, like our SWAT teams, all the way down to our basic patrol level officers, by giving a lot more training to our officers on crisis intervention. A lot of our officers have received some basic training in that, but at my agency, for example, the goal is to have every officer certified as what we call a CIT, crisis intervention team member, so that we have extra verbalization skills, we have extra knowledge on mental health, and ways to de-escalate situations versus making them all about use of force.
Thank you. I just would like to ask Konstantinos to stop sharing his screen. I think we got that one on, so we look at your computer right now. So if you just take your screen down, I would be pleased. Thank you.
Oh, do you?
Thank you, Jo. I would like to continue to Joseph, if you still here. I got 2 questions for you that are asked by our audience, and one is about the mission. You said you've been there for 8 months, and the question is, how long are you supposed to be there, and how long is the mission that you're taking part of, and what will the goals be after the elections?
Oh, a very good question. Yes, my contract is for 1 year. So we have a lot of plans the upcoming month here with further elections. And we are doing a community-oriented policing training for all the police station commanders in the main capital, Hargeisa, and also from the other cities. So that I look very much forward to. The UNSOM mission is a political mission, which means that we don't have any really operational mandate. We're only here to support and give advice and mentor. So I really don't know. The last resolution was adopted by the Security Council last August this year, and it has an extension for at least 2022. So for that long, at least we will stay, but I definitely think it would be longer. So that's very shortly, and so the main focus now for the rest of my contract here is to continue to try to implement especially community-oriented policing and democratic policing values. So I look forward to that. Hope that was an answer to the question.
I wish you success with this. I got another question. Is it a difference between the working task between female and male officers, as you mentioned that they really didn't want to be in the same room from the very beginning?
It's very clear that within the mandate, with the UN mandate and the UN resolution, supports gender equality, and also to support that we always have female participations in our training. And so, at this part we always had. I'm very happy with that. So the Somaliland police force also recruits and trains women as police officers, also as special protection officers. The problem is that in many occasions, they still end up, even though they are promoted or having other tasks and duties, still also many times is being stuck with more traditional works as bringing coffee and logistics and that sort of thing. So it's a very gentle task that we have to smooth out this. And one of the things I was very happy about the other week was that it was actually an NGO conducting weapons training for female officers only, because that is one of the arguments that I face when I meet the police commissioner, that the female don't have enough weapon training. So there's a lot of NGOs and a lot of the UN and other international agencies here that support, but we have some way to go. But at least we have women in quite high-ranking official positions.
But they are supposed to do the same kind of work as the male police officers, but they are not allowed really then. Yeah.
But they due to some of the culture demands, they also stuck with some of the more older and traditional shores as well.
Yeah. Well, we've seen that in our own country many years back in time as well. So they got their journey to, and I think it's healthy that you work through it and help them along with it. So thank you, Joseph.
Thank you.
Mr. Hara, are you still on board with us? I got 2 questions for you from the audience as well.
Okay, yeah, sure.
Yes, the one is about the budget. Was it a special budget assigned for you to prepare for the Olympics and for the Paralympics? The extension of the police budget, or did you have to work within the set budget that is normally given to the police every year?
Okay. Again, I don't have any details that can be afforded for now, but I'm sure that the extra budget was offered for the security arrangement for Tokyo 2020 from the central government. Yes.
When you planned for the Olympics and the Paralympics, as leader or all the leaders, what was the most important for you to when it comes to what you would like to achieve?
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I couldn't.
When you started to plan for the Olympics, and also as leader, and also your fellow leaders in the police, what was the most important goal for you? When the Paralympics were over, what was the goal for you at that time when you started to make the planning and training?
I'm not directly in charge of the security arrangement for the Olympics, but as you know, this is a common goal shared by the police, worldwide police forces. At any time, police force should be prepared to ensure the safety and security of people who should be protected by the safety threat. So from that aspect, the aim or the goal of implementing the security arrangement was to ensure the public safety, both from the aspect that each citizens and the entire public safety, public security.
Yeah. And I would say we haven't had any reports about any major accident or problems that you faced during the 2 arrangements. So you probably reached your goal. You had a safe Olympics and a safe Paralympics. So you reached the goal to keep the safety for the public and for the competitors as well.
Yeah.
Yes.
Definitely, yes.
Yes.
Fortunately, we were able to achieve the pre-planned goal. Yeah.
Lovely. Thank you so much, Mr. O'Hara. I would like to forward a thank you on behalf of the IPA and IBSET Gimborn to all of the speakers that joined us together with London Policing College. If you would like to attend any of the seminars that is provided by the IBS at Gimborn, there is a web page you can visit. And I'm very pleased that we completed our 3 workshops with interesting speakers all through the week. And I would like to hand over the last word to Bob. Please, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Maybrit. Thank you, Maybrit. And again, Maybrit, thanks again to you, not just for hosting us this afternoon or this evening, but also for all your work with the IPA in bringing a lot of this together. Can I thank our speakers tonight for fascinating insights onto different challenges around the world. Mr. O'Hara, you mentioned there the esteem in which the Tokyo police should be held following the Olympics. Certainly what you achieved was awesome. And I was the gold commander for the Olympics in London in 2012, and I know the hard work that goes into it without having to try and manage it through a COVID pandemic. So a fantastic achievement from you. But I was particularly minded, Joseph, your vision of a gold suite. I mean, I worked in the gold suite in Scotland Yard for many years, so I'd love to work in one of those. So as Maybrit said, that is the last of our 7 workshops this year. We've had some fascinating insights from across the world, in fact, thanks to the IPA. And what it always brings home to me is the courage, resilience and innovation of police officers throughout the world, not only to deal with the pandemic and the issues arising from it, but also at a time when they and their own families were at threat. So that's it, everybody, for this series. Can I just remind you all of the London Policing College conference on the 23rd of November at the University of West London. The brochure is out now. If you want to attend in person, you can register. If not, it will also be online courtesy of UWL, so you can actually join in for all or part of the day. So can we finally close off with, once again, thanks to our speakers for tonight. Thanks to Maybrit and the International Police Association for bringing this together. Everybody stay safe out there and hope to see some of you in November. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Party we had around the table.
Bye. Thanks, Bob.